Hey, it's Karen Elaine again. Welcome back. I know that if you've been here before, you know that art is what makes the world go around. Everywhere you look, an artist has designed something, created something. It doesn't matter what it is. And here we go. The video today is 10 tips and tricks for watercolor. The first one is, before you get started, you might want to draw out what you want to paint. So when I start a new painting, there are 3 things that are very important about a watercolor painting. The first one is to get a high quality or a higher quality watercolor paper. I usually use Strathmore 300 series or 400 series. It's not as expensive as you can get. You can get very, very expensive watercolor paper, but this is not as expensive. But I also going to warn you against paper that is really, really thin and really, really cheap, because when you draw on it, it will be very difficult to erase. And that's the whole point of what you're doing when you draw on this piece of paper, is that you want to use a pencil that's very, very light. There are different grades of pencil, and a grade means how hard or how soft the lead or the graphite is. And they go from 2H to 8B. The 8B is very soft and very, very dark, very, very dark pencil. That's really great for shading, but if you want to use a pencil for watercolor, we want to stay at a 2H or an H or an HB, because it will be lighter and it's a harder graphite, and it will be lighter and easier to erase. I usually use an H2 pencil. You get all the drawing on there, and then you try to erase as much as you can to just so you can barely see the pencil. Because remember, when you watercolor, it is a see-through medium, and so you're going to see you're going to be able to see the pencil lines. Now, if that's in your design where you really want the pencil lines in there, then there's nothing wrong with that. But if you don't want the pencil lines, you want to make sure that you don't paint over pencil lines, or make sure that you put them on so lightly that when you add your color, you don't see the pencil line. There's tip number 1. Okay, tip number 2, it's always good to test your color of paint, or your brush, or the size of your brush, or maybe the pens that you're using, or whatever you want to do on a scrap piece of paper, instead of just jumping right into your final illustration or your final piece of artwork. I mean, many of my students have such a fear to just get started when they could have just grab a scrap of piece of paper, a scrap piece of, I don't know, copy paper, anything to just play around with patterns or colors or pins or whatever you need to. And that's another reason why I really strongly believe you should always have a sketchbook. This is another reason why I really believe in the whole practice and play in your sketchbook. You work really hard on a painting, and then you add something and you go, oh my gosh, I just hate it. When you could have practiced on another piece of paper in your journal, in your script, in your sketchbook. That's tip number 2. Always have a scrap piece of paper to test out the size of your brush, the color that you're using, maybe a pen that you're using. Okay, tip number 3. Many times when we are painting in watercolor, we get in a rush and we paint one color next to another color that maybe we don't want them to mix, and one will bloom into the other one. And so what you need to do is grab a white paper towel. It needs to be a clean white paper towel with nothing on it, very dry. You can go in and blotch up the color, and then you can go back with your paintbrush and pick up paint with your paintbrush, clean your paintbrush, and then get the color that you want on there on your paintbrush, and then go back over it and blend it onto your paper. So there's tip number 3. Make sure you have lots of clean, dry paper towel. Hang on, tip number 4. Oh no, I didn't want it to do that. Oh no, that's not what I wanted either. You know, what you do when you have watercolor is you don't wipe off your picture, because it's just gonna smear all over. If something happens and you want to blotch something up because you don't like it or you don't want it to look like that, you take a clean piece of paper and you dab, lift it up, and then you can repaint. That was another one of the tips, but I just wanted to show you, don't smear, dab. Okay, that's it. Tip number 5, paint lightly and then just add layers and add layers and add layers to get the colors that you need. So in this painting, it's a wet on wet technique where we are painting very lightly in the background, basically because there's lots of water on the paper. So when you add the color, it blooms out and it mixes up with the water, makes it lighter. And then as we keep painting the painting, we let it dry some, and then we add layers on top and layers on top, and they get darker, and that is another tip. This is another example where I took a photograph and I drew something out very lightly, then I painted very lightly, and then I kept adding layers, and here's the final product. Tip number 6. Okay, tip number 6. Tip number 6 is to always have a large tray to blend your watercolors so you can test them before you paint with them and get the right color before you put it on paper. When you buy pan watercolors, most of the pan watercolors, like this travel set, have a mixing tray attached to it. It's usually in the lid, like this travel version from Winsor Newton. But if you buy tube paint, you have to have a mixing tray for your tube paint. I suggest getting a large mixing tray so then you have lots of places to mix your paint. This one is the first one that I ever had. I got it back when I was in college. Another thing that I really personally like is if I get tube paint in gouache or watercolor and I get a tray, I love to have a lid for it. So then, you know, once you squirt out the paint, sometimes you don't use all the paint. With watercolor and gouache, you can go back and reuse the paint. But if you don't put the lid on it, then sometimes dust and other things get on it, and then your paint will not look very well when you put it on the paper. So I really do, suggest having a mixing tray that has a lid. And just like tip number 2, always have a scrap piece of paper that once you've mixed your paint on your palette, test your paint on a scrap piece of paper before you actually add it to your painting. Tip number 7, blend on your paper while you're painting. Here's a great example of a flower where we are going to blend and add color and water to an existing painting that's already wet to change the color and maybe even add some contrast. I'm going to add a little bit of water to make it move into the flower. Okay, then I'm going to go back with the same center, which is the purple and the brown combined, and I'm going to add a little bit of dark to the center of our flower. And I've got a lot of water on here. I didn't tape it down, so it's kind of, the paper is sort of buckling a little. But the good part about that is it is also making the color move into the flower, which is basically what we want to do, right? If you love what you see, all of the art that has been shown to you today is either on YouTube or has been integrated into bite-sized classes, and all of the links are below. Go to harmonyandlife.com to check out my classes and learn step by step how to create any of the pieces that you just saw today. Also, if you want a swipe file that has images and all the descriptions of all of the tips that we just went through, there is a PDF link in the description below. Check it out. Oh my gosh, make sure you subscribe so you can get a video every week. Stay tuned. So tip number 8 is to mix and play on your paper. Sometimes you have too much water or not enough water, or too much paint or not enough paint, and you never know what might happen when you start playing and mixing on your paper. Check it out. Ooh, I like that combo. This purple and that's really pretty. Well, that was unexpected. I didn't expect that. Here comes 9. So I just got finished splattering this, but I want to grab it and go put it in the scanner. And of course I don't want the wet paint on my scanner. So what I'm doing is I'm just gonna get a hairdryer and I'm gonna dry it. So I don't know if you see a cool setting. It's blowing away. See, I'm putting it on a cool setting. I want it cool, I don't want it too hot. The reason why is I want it to dry. But I don't want too much heat or it will make the paper buckle and then it'll be all wavy, and then when I go try to scan it in the computer, it'll be all wavy, and then I have to clean it up in Photoshop. And I don't want to clean up any more than I have to in Photoshop. So that is tip, not 10, but that's tip number 9. Watercolor, so much fun. And finally, tip number 10. Of course, there's plenty of other tips. Come back and see me. Tip number 10 is sort of a special effect. You know, maybe I should do a video only on the special effects. Anyway, this one is about adding salt. The top up here needs to be sky. I want to try to keep everything kind of in the same color scheme or color palette. So we're going to make a sunset up here. So then that way we're staying with the same color palette. But the first part, we're just mainly adding water to wet the paper, so then when we put the color on there, it blends more evenly. In our sunset, it will be fun to have a variation in the color. So we're going to do yellow on one side, we're going to do orange on the other side. While the sky is still wet, I am going to add some salt to give it some texture. And then we're going to let it dry. I love the salt. So you put the salt on it and the salt separates the color from the paper. It's really pretty. So we're going to let this dry and then we're going to come back one more time and we're going to put in the rest of the foliage and everything in the bottom. And here is a close-up of the final artwork. Of course, I do have plenty of other tips and tricks. Don't forget to subscribe. Harmony and Life Art Lessons. And I'll see you in the next video.